right, good morning, Tri-Cities. I am Carl from TRIDEC, and this is Coffee with Carl. Today we've got a great set of guests. I'd like to introduce from our own Tri-Cities Airport, Mr. Buck Taft. Buck, welcome.
Thank you.
And our the airport contracts with probably the leading aviation expert in the country, and his name is Jack Penning from Volaire Consultants. Jack, welcome to Coffee with Carl this morning.
That's the best intro I have had in all of my many dozens of Zoom conferences, so I appreciate it.
Well, since you already told us that you have 3 more yet to go, let's see how we stack up at the end of the day, right?
Exactly. You're going to get me fresh.
Okay. Well, guys, thanks for joining us this morning. As you know, in our tradition of now 6 weeks, we talk about the coffee or the mug or whatever we're drinking. So Buck already said that my coffee game this morning is not very strong because I got a Starbucks Washington mug. And since I'm new to moving back to Washington, I'm just excited to be here in Washington. I got showing the state colors as it applies mainly to Western Washington. They do have an apple on there. That's the only kind of, mid part of the state that really represents us. But that's what I've got. I saw Jack already putting his mug up there. Let's go to Jack next. What do you got?
I got the right one for this, Tri-Cities Airport. I'm representing all the way over here in Portland.
Nice. Buck, what do you got?
Well, I don't drink coffee, but I drink water. So I have my half-gallon jug of water.
Nice. Got the super tanker.
Yeah, if he has to get up and leave halfway through, we'll know why.
Well, that's great. Well, we'll get into the discussion this morning, but we were on before we started the Zoom meeting this morning, and it doesn't seem like that long ago, maybe the second week in February, the 3 of us were back in Chicago with the corporate call to United, which, that was my first one, being here in the Tri-Cities, and I thought it went awesome. Obviously, Buck and Jack have a great relationship with United, and, talking about what was going on with Tri-Cities Airport at that time and how we're building service and getting ready to open up some new legs. And now just, at 3, almost 4 months later, things have really changed. So I think that's our topic today. And maybe to kick us off, Buck, do you want to give us some insights on how are things going at the airport and what are you guys seeing? How are you dealing with this COVID crisis? And then, what are you planning for as we start to come out of it and reopen?
Yeah, I mean, when we went to Chicago in February, we were already on pace, that normally January first quarter is gives me a good idea. If we see significant growth in the first quarter, we're going to have a big year normally. And this first quarter, we were up significantly, and this is going to be a good year. And that was in February. And then in March, we were down 59% passengers. April, we were down 95%. And it looks like May's going to be around, somewhere in the 80% range down. So hopefully June, we start seeing the creeping up to, down 65 or 70%. But just to put those April numbers in perspective for you, last April, we averaged approximately 1,200 passengers a day. And this April, we had roughly 1,700 passengers for the whole month of April, which averages out to be about 58 a day. So significant reduction. I mean, basically nothing was going on at the airport. But the good news is in the last 8 days, we've had 1,700 passengers roughly. So we're averaging about 215 a day. So that we're off the bottom and we're starting to trend up, but I'm not real excited about those numbers, but they're better than what we've had, and it's hopefully continues to grow a little bit each week, each month, and before we start to see some sort of normal operations return.
You bet. And I think we've talked about this before, but maybe for the audience today, I know a significant part of the revenue that the airport receives is things like parking. And I know the 3 times I flew out of the airport, short time I was here before we went into the shutdown, every time I was there, the parking lot was full. So, and I think we had talked about it, Buck, but was the airport and the Port of Pasco able to get some supplemental funding like through the FAA to offset some of those losses? Is that kind of the way that works, or what's going on with that?
Well, the CARES Act, which was past, maybe a month ago or so,
Yeah.
we received a grant for $5.9 million out of that CARES Act fund, which the FAA's given us some pretty good guidelines on how to use that money, where it can be used. How our plan is to use that money right now is 2.1 million of that is going to go to our bond payments that come due around December, and a big chunk of that is for the terminal project, and the remainder of that money we will use for operating. So hopefully, you know, it gets us through these. Hopefully we're out of that basement and we're starting to trend up where that money can stretch for a while. But you know, if we were going to have a few more months of that down 95%, that money wouldn't last very long. But we're grateful that we got the 5.9 million. It's going to help us cover some of our costs. I mean, when you lose those passengers, I mean, we've had a significant loss of revenue. Like you said, the parking lot's empty. The car rentals aren't renting cars. Concessions not selling food. They can't be open. You know, they can't have their restaurant open, so they've got pre-made food. And now I know the concessionaire is starting to come on board. More people are starting to rent cars. Parking lot starting to have some cars in it. But you know, due to basically the drop off of passengers, a lot of tenants have asked in the terminal have asked for rent deferrals. So we've pushed that rent back. So we're not getting any rent from them at the moment. So that, you know, just leads into more of the budget issues that you have. You know, our deferral was for 3 months, and I think we know now we're going to have to extend that a little bit longer. And staff's having discussions on what our next steps are, and we're running through things to ensure we do what's best for us, but also for those that need the assistance.
Well, that's great. I mean, you know, I think we read a lot about that, and you know, at TRIDEC, we're working with a lot of small businesses that we didn't before through some different grant programs. And I think those kind of programs help a lot. And I think for the airport, you know, you guys have done, from my perception, such a good job about the presentation of the airport, new terminal, really great services to maintain that continuity with your vendors, you know, and give them a way to do that is really important. Because I think if you lost somebody, it's probably really hard to get somebody back in there that's going to maintain that same level of customer service that you've got that kind of meets the airport standard. So I think those are really great programs.
Yeah, I mean, and you're kind of in a position where you have to help them. I mean, this is an unprecedented time. You know, we didn't lose a couple flights, and you know, we lost almost all our passengers in April. So, you know, we've got to do something to help those.
You bet. No, that's great. Well, let's shift it over and look, you know, maybe at that national stage. And again, we've got Jack on board. And again, first time in 6 of these Coffee with Karls that we're actually going to use the share screen feature. Jack's going to run us through some slides, which because I've been through Jack's presentations, I know they're really good data and good information. Our audience is really going to appreciate it. I do want to remind everybody, we will use the question and answer feature. If you're on Zoom and want to ask a question, just use that Q&A box down at the bottom. And then as Jack goes through his slides, we'll get into some of that question and answer and go into a little more detail on the conversation. So take it away, Jack.
All right, and I don't do this to try and, you know, bore anybody, but it's something.
Wow.
Uh-oh.
Uh-oh.
We might be experiencing some bandwidth issues in Portland.
Yeah, I mean, everything was good during the mic check.
It was.
You know, there's one thing while we're waiting for Jack to get on, but just to let everyone know, some of our cleaning protocols right now in the terminal, I'm sure that's something people are going to want to know about, but right now, the airport custodians are continuing to work on high-touch areas due to the lack of passengers. You know, kind of the trash and the bathroom, they're not getting used as much. I mean, there's times where we'll walk through in the afternoon and you still see the blue water in the toilets because we just don't have that throughput that people constantly using. So the custodians are able to focus on the high-touch areas a lot more due to the lack of passengers.
But
What's that?
no, I was just agreeing with you. Sorry.
Oh, no, no problem. But as far as what the airlines are doing, they're all a little bit different. But in general, they're disinfecting all the entire aircraft before each flight. I mean, from the windows, the window latches on the blinds, seat backs, seats, seat belts, restrooms. They're even doing some electrostatic spraying in the aircraft. Their employees are required to wear masks when dealing with folks. The only one that's a little bit different is Allegiant, and they're doing their own process right now. Social distancing, they're all trying to manage the social distancing in their areas and on aircraft. Face masks, everyone but Allegiant is required to wear face masks on the flight. Allegiant is recommending it, and they hand them out to folks, but the other airlines, it's mandatory. They're also only booking flights to 60 to 65% capacity. Generally, that's the middle seat open. Allegiant, however, is not, and they're very clear about that when you buy a ticket on their website. So their flights have been flying out full. And basically, there's no in-flight services, or the in-flight services have been greatly reduced. So you don't come around with the cart giving everyone a soda now. So I believe most of them give you a bag with a water and a wipe and some other stuff in it. So
Okay.
I am back. Sorry about
All right.
my Wi-Fi.
Oh, no worries.
Totally dropped.
It's the world we live in. I think everybody's encountered at least one meeting where, your broadband's awesome until you need to go on, and then boom, it just falls off. So
That's exactly it.
no problem. Well, let's give it another shot. What do you got, Jack?
All right, so I'll go ahead and share kind of our outlook of what's going on nationally, and kind of where things are going to be going for the Tri-Cities Airport in the future. And again, I don't want this to be boring for everybody, but I think it's helpful to see things kind of in a context of with graphics and such, so you can see where we are compared to where we've been before. So I want to compare things to how air service reacted to previous downturns, how airlines are serving the Tri-Cities today, so what our schedule looks like, our current scheduled service versus what we had previously, and then what the airlines are required. Each airline has a required minimum of service, and I want to show you what that looks like if things get worse, what our air service will look like. And then what is the future? How long is it going to take for us to come back from this? What performs well, what doesn't? And I want to end with things that everybody who is listening to us can do to help us out, because we're going to need the community's help, and especially the help from the business community, to communicate to the airlines how demand is coming back. So having said that, previous downturns, so this is a gross domestic product. So it's essentially the economic measure of performance. This goes back to 1990. And you can see there have been recessions here, the Gulf War, we had 9/11, then the Great Recession. You can see what's happened to the economy during each of those. So I wanted to compare US passengers, and you'll note that US passengers were trending ahead of the economic trend until we got to the year 2000. And even before 9/11, they started to decline. And they never got back to the same level as the economic recovery. Even as of 2019, we were doing fewer passengers per dollar of GDP in 2019 than we were in 2000. So that's migration to things like Zoom, it's migration to conference calls, and it's people taking fewer trips, but maybe longer trips, that kind of activity. So, our passengers are always going down by a larger percentage than the actual economy goes down in any recession. That's been pretty clear over time. Air service takes a lot longer to recover. Took us 7 years to recover from the last recession nationally, 7 years, and that was with a GDP that only went down 2.5%. The GDP this year is going to go down significantly more than 2.5%. So let's look at it, the same graph, but against Tri-Cities passengers. And you can see around 1994, our passengers started to lag the national economy. And we finally got to the point where we had more passengers per dollar of GDP in 2019 than we had at any point since 1993. So lots of very hard work to get the air service where it needed to be for the Tri-Cities. So the recessions were difficult, but the increased spending at places like Hanford helped us through that 2008 to 2019 period. So our passengers like the economy, we just caught up, and now we hit COVID-19. And so that's where we are. Now, the good news is, in every previous recession in the last 30 years, Tri-Cities Airport has seen growth in passengers during the recession. That's really encouraging for us, because that means we will probably see growth much faster than our peer markets, and we'll get service back much faster as people come back into the airline system and as people want to travel. Not many communities are like that. Now, I did an analysis too. If our GDP goes down about 7% this year, which is, I think, an optimistic outlook, passengers will go down 48%. That'll be the largest drop in passengers in any year in the history of commercial aviation, dating back to 1927. So we are in an unprecedented time right now. So let's look at the Tri-Cities. This was our capacity for 2019 by month. This is what is currently scheduled for capacity today. So we had 1.1 million seats last year. We got about 925,000 this year. We're down 61% in May. But I got to tell you, we're not really going to rebound like that. July is not going to be above July of 2019. Our seats will not go up that quickly. This isn't the full breadth of cuts. July is going to be maybe 35–40% of the seats we had July of last year. At our best case, we'll probably get to 70% of capacity by the end of the year. If there's no second wave, if there's no outbreak after Memorial Day weekend and everybody hanging out together, maybe we'll get back to 70% by the end of the year if we're really lucky. So this was our service, early March Chicago service. That was the meeting Carl referenced. We were in Chicago in February to discuss our brand new United nonstop service to O'Hare. This is what our service was going to look like: 22 departures a day, about 1,700 departing seats per day. Buck told you last year we averaged about 1,200 people on flights every day. This year, getting on flights every day. This summer, we're probably looking at close to 1,500 people getting on flights, and we're under 50 a lot of days. So it just shows you how far we've fallen. This is the service that we have as of today. Minneapolis is suspended. O'Hare's start is suspended. LA service on Allegiant is suspended. San Francisco is suspended by United. We've got Seattle, Vegas, Phoenix, Salt Lake, and Denver. That's it. So what the airlines have done is regionalize their networks. And this is very similar even in big cities. For example, United in Portland, where I live, isn't flying Chicago either. So for me to get to Chicago on United, I have to go through Denver, even from a bigger city. And that's where there will be an advantage on the other side of this. I'll explain a little more, but a lot of our passengers drive to Seattle, but Seattle's not going to have near the breadth of flights and the breadth of schedule they had before. So driving to Seattle for a flight won't be near as attractive because you're probably going to have to connect anyway. So through September 30th, airlines are required to keep service at a minimum level. That's because they took money from the CARES Act as well. Airports got money, the airlines got money. Our minimum service that's required is only 2.5 departures a day, 350 seats a day. That's 21% of normal. And airlines are only required to keep service to Seattle, Denver, Salt Lake, and Vegas. That's it. So if we do see a huge spike in cases as we reopen, this could be our reality for service through September 30th. Now you say, well, what happens as of October 1st? Assuming that airlines don't get any more money from the CARES Act, they can do whatever they want. Airlines can cancel any route they want. And I'm going to tell you right now, there are going to be a number of communities that are going to lose service completely in October, even if demand is rebounding quickly, because airlines will finally have the opportunity to realign networks, to carve out their own areas of the country, and to remove cities that were on the edge of profitability. And there are a number of regional cities in the Pacific Northwest, I think, that are in danger of losing service if demand doesn't pick up. Now, Tri-Cities Airport isn't going to lose all service, and I don't see any scenario in which we get to this level of service this low. But be aware that is going to be happening. Our minimum capacity would be around 600,000 seats this year, so it's about half of, well, less than half of what we had last year. That's our minimum. So what is the future of our service? Well, I wanted to point out, we just did a brand new study to figure out of the people who live in our immediate area, the immediate Pasco area, well, and up to Yakima and over to Walla Walla, what airport do those people fly out of primarily? 44% of them use Tri-Cities Airport, but 29% of the people who live in our market or who travel to our market fly in and out of Seattle. So they drive to Seattle. 7% use Yakima, 12% drive to Portland. So we're, even with our capacity that we had, that peak capacity, we still didn't have enough seats for all of the demand that was in our market. Say demand only returns to 50% by this time next year. We could still support the amount of flights and the number of seats that we had in 2019 if we retained 80% of that limited demand. So the more people fly out of our airport, the more service we're going to have available. And I do think, you know, that we will see fewer people driving because the attractiveness of driving is getting a nonstop. I did an analysis of PDX service. They've lost 35 nonstop cities, 35 cities that you can't get to nonstop out of Portland anymore, out of 70. So almost half of their cities. It's not going to be attractive to drive when you have to connect from that airport anyway. We have enough passengers. We could fill 35 flights a day if we retained everybody. We have about half of that because we only retain about half the passengers. Now our retention's going up and the market is growing really quick, or it was. We grew 16% from 2017 to 2019, but it remains to be seen what demand is going to look like as we move forward. So I wanted to show these maps. These are cool. These are the percentage of people who fly out of Tri-Cities Airport. So green means we get a lot more people flying out of Tri-Cities Airport, and red means we lose those people. So in our immediate area, 65% of people are using our airport, which is pretty good. It's not great, but it's pretty good. If you look at Seattle, it's pulling mostly from the area up by Yakima and not so much from our immediate area. You look at PDX, it's pulling from our Oregon counties and zip codes that are in our immediate area. And then you look at Yakima, Yakima doesn't even retain well in Yakima. So when you think about what does service look like on the other side of this crisis, well, Yakima is 2-hour drive in good conditions to SeaTac. Yakima could be in danger of losing flights because it's too easy to use another airport. So I wanted to underscore that the most important thing is when you come back to travel, please check Tri-Cities Airport first, check PSC first. So our projected routes, we believe that most routes are going to be safe. We did an analysis of profitability. The only ones that we're slightly worried about, San Francisco on United, just because United does much better to Denver, and they're competing in the West with Alaska, and it's very difficult to compete on fare. And so that one is a possible route that may not come back. Minneapolis is very, very profitable, but if Delta decides to regionalize how it flows people over its network, it's going to want all of our people to go over Salt Lake City. It's not going to want to fly them all the way to Minneapolis, because if it can take you over Salt Lake and still get you where you're going, the cost of operating Salt Lake to Pasco is about 1/3 the cost of operating Pasco to Minneapolis. And so they may try to reduce their costs by regionalizing their hubs. And finally, on Seattle-Tacoma, Alaska still is the dominant carrier in that market, and Delta has a very difficult time competing. It also remains to be seen what happens to Asian travel. Does Asian travel rebound in the fall, or does it take 5 years for people to go to Asia again? If so, the Seattle hub for Delta could be in some danger because they may not have enough passengers going to Asia for it to make sense. So that kind of gives you an idea, and I'll explain why this piece is important in just a bit too. So we looked at outcomes for capacity. So this is our scheduled capacity through June, and you can see that huge drop off that we had. So that's our minimum capacity that's required by law. I don't think we'll be there. We looked at several different potential capacity scenarios, a low, a middle, and a high, best case being a high. The probable range, we're probably going to be down for the year about 50%, which is in line with guidance from international agencies. Worst case, we're down maybe by 3/4. Best case, we're still going to be down by 1/3. And that's if demand comes back fully by the end of the year. So in terms of passengers, this one is the sad one. This is actual passengers using Tri-Cities Airport. I mean, it fell off a cliff. I've been an aviation consultant for 20 years. So I've been through 9/11 as a consultant. I've been through 2008 as a consultant. This is orders of magnitude worse than anything anyone in our industry has ever seen. You know, minimum service, we're going to be way down at the bottom, not even 10,000 passengers a month. Low, medium, and high, our probable range, we're probably going to be down 60 to 70% in total passengers. And part of the reason we're going to be down farther is because Washington is going to be slower to open up. And so even if we have a quick recovery, we'll be down 1/2. So, you know, for the airport, that's represents maybe 500,000 passengers that won't be using it this year, 500,000 people. So our recovery plan is important, and it basically, airline outreach is what underpins the plan. The key for us and the key for the group watching this in the Tri-Cities is we need to be able to assess the return of business travelers. We need to understand when you're going to be back on flights, what your demand is going to be, say, by the fall or winter relative to 2019, where you go, and who you prefer to fly on. If we can get this information through TRIDEC and through Karl and his team, that will help us communicate to the airlines what real demand is going to look like. Because, like I said, we're in a place we've never been in before. We used to be able, you know, even through past recessions, we can say, okay, we know what the demand curve look like. We can forecast out where we're going based on where we've been before. Here, this is so much deeper than what we've seen before in terms of the economic hit and just the hit to our business. It's impossible to forecast. So if we have real-time data on X, Y, and Z business, all are going to be flying as of October 1, we can communicate to United, Alaska, and Delta and say, look, guys, we know these passengers are coming back on this day, which will help them assess how many seats that we get in our community. Second piece is, you know, we are going to be monitoring that return in demand. We're looking every day at the number of people going through the checkpoint. We're going to be focusing on the return of suspended nonstops before we talk about anything else. So that's the return of San Francisco. It's the return of Minneapolis. That's going to be our focus into the fall. It's going to be a while before we can recruit new service. And when we do, it's going to be probably trying to get Chicago back in the schedule, just because this has been such a shock to the system. So we'll be meeting with network planners at conferences. We'll have, when appropriate, headquarters meetings with our incumbent carriers. But I want to also mention there will be opportunity coming out of this because there's going to be so many airplanes parked. And I want to go to the free agent carrier, SkyWest. SkyWest Airlines, you've probably flown a ton if you've flown out of Tri-Cities Airport, but you may not even know you've ever flown them because they fly painted as United, as Delta, as American, and as Alaska. So they're flying as the regional service on the regional jets for all of these other airlines. They're having their contracts cut back. So Delta is sending 55 planes back to SkyWest, not going to use them anymore. United's going to be sending planes back. SkyWest is in a very good financial position. In fact, it turned a profit in first quarter. The only airline in the US that turned a profit. So it doesn't want to furlough any pilots. It would rather fly or find new places to fly those 55 planes or the 100 planes, or if it ends up with 200 planes, than parking them and furloughing pilots. So what it will be looking for is markets that are underserved, markets that have financial incentives, and markets where it knows it can make money, where it can add service. it's in discussions, or it has been in discussions with Alaska Airlines, so that SkyWest could pick markets to fly using the Alaska Airlines brand. If that happened, there could be an opportunity for us to get service to Portland back. And so we have to also, as we monitor the return in demand, be cognizant that there will be opportunities now that we didn't have when we had a pilot shortage and we had a shortage of aircraft. And there will be a chance for us to go and grab opportunities, especially as we get into the end of this year. So it's not all doom and gloom. There are opportunities ahead. So having said that, happy to take questions, and I will unshare my screen here. And Karl, I'll send it back to you.
Jack, that was great. And I especially appreciate your closing statements, where it sounds like there is an opportunity for us to actually potentially pick up some flights. And I appreciate the fact, you know, because at TRIDEC, we're doing things today in this COVID crisis that we didn't do before we went into this. And so what you recommended is something that we'll go back to the team and get with Buck on. You know, if there's a way that we can stand up and bring some of our other business organization partners on board, asking business travelers to start to try to forecast that demand, you know, that if we can feed some of that back, and especially this opportunity that you described with SkyWest, that could be really cool to be able to do that. That's great. And we appreciate you putting that recommendation in there. I think it brings this conversation full circle. It's like, yeah, it's bad, but here's what we can do to start working together and start to plan into the future. That's perfect.
Exactly. And I do want to, I know I'm kind of skipping ahead because I'm looking at the questions, but I want to give a shout out to the other Karl with a C.
That's right.
Karl Adrian. I've worked with him since I want to say around 2005, 2006. And he asked if I was having withdrawal because I fly about 250,000 miles a year and I've been grounded. My last flight was March 12th. Yes. Wow. And I intend to be on a plane now, let's see, in 10 days. So cross your fingers for it. He also asked about mergers, airline mergers, and then I'll close these questions so you can moderate, Karl. But
that's okay.
He asked about, you know, is Alaska going to be merging with someone, or are we going to see mergers? I don't think immediately we'll see that. Alaska is in really good financial position right now. They really handled this well. They drew down capacity appropriately. Their cost basis was lower. They have very low debt. They've been able to pay off. They've completely paid off the cost of the integration of Virgin America. So they have no debt associated with that. They're in excellent position. Delta's in excellent position. United has done a ton to improve its financial position. And I would argue that it's probably in the fourth best position after Southwest, Delta, Alaska. And the only one that's a little bit shakier is American, but even American is in a decent position right now. It has a lot of debt, but if demand comes back to about 60% by fall, I think they'll be okay. So the only ones I could see, the only places where I see mergers as a real possibility would be between low-cost carriers, so Spirit and Frontier maybe, or Allegiant buys somebody because they're in great shape, or maybe this is an opportunity for Alaska and JetBlue to finally hook up or something like that. But I really don't think that's likely before the end of this year because it's going to be hard to get enough, essentially enough capital together to make it work, unless it's a merger of equals, and we don't have too many equals. I will note one other thing on that, and that is Alaska is joining the One World Alliance with American Airlines. That's been accelerated to this fall. That means you'll be able to buy a ticket on American Airlines out of the Tri-Cities as soon as that One World tie-up goes into place. And so it will give us access to that other major network that we haven't had access to before.
Oh, that's great. Jack, we'll stay with you for a minute. We do have one question from Facebook, and it was a discussion when you were talking about our leakage, people driving to Seattle for those flights, and this question relates to pricing, and that was from this question, pricing a lot of times, maybe not just the direct flights or something, drove part of that leakage. So, do you have any forecast or estimate on how, as we come out of this and some of these opportunities arise, how's pricing going to change, and what do you see coming on the pricing front that might help us encourage more people to fly out of Tri-Cities?
Absolutely. right now you're going to see, well, you see exceptionally good deals on Allegiant right now. So if you want to go down to Phoenix or something, it's a great time in terms of pricing if you feel comfortable and feel safe. I would note, if you're trying to buy a ticket right now on a network carrier, you're not seeing very good pricing at all, especially for June and July, for two reasons. Reason number one, a lot of our flights are booked at least to 60 or 70%. The airlines don't want to book them too much more than that. And so there simply aren't enough seats for the airlines to be able to offer a low fare. They need to raise the fare in order to ensure there are seats for the last minute emergency traveler. And that's why airlines scale fares. It's not because they're trying to stick it to you. It's because they're trying to save a certain number of seats on every flight until just an hour or two before that flight for the emergency traveler. That's what they're doing. So for the next couple of months, I don't think you're going to see great deals. You never know. If you're traveling on a Tuesday or something, you might. As we come out of this, the interesting thing is Alaska Airlines had just put in a new revenue management system that changes the way that they're able to price regional markets. It used to be that Pasco would have an add-on from Seattle. So your fare would be the Seattle fare plus a local add-on. So it'd always be a certain amount higher than what the Seattle fare is. Now they are pricing through itineraries. And what that means is you're going to LA, the fare is going to be different out of Pasco than any other city based on demand in that market. And so that should ultimately bring our fares down, and all the other carriers are going to match those fares. So you should see fares coming down as we go into the end of the summer, when we have capacity coming up. So I do think when airlines feel like there's demand and airlines feel like they can encourage people to book, you're going to see a lot of fare sales. Right now, the demand we're seeing is people who have to travel anyway, and the airlines have very little reason to offer a discount because those people are going to fly either way. And the airlines don't really want to encourage people to go from the Tri-Cities, down to Florida for a vacation. They don't want to encourage that kind of travel, but when they feel like it's safe to encourage it, they're going to. And I will bet you our fares will be a lot closer to Seattle and Portland than they have been in a long time.
That's a great answer. I think that, this question related to maybe saving $100 if you drove to Seattle. And I think just based on the change in the pricing model, that might, over time, as the capacity comes back, we might see that go away. And so again, for everybody that's on, we just want to encourage you, before you, look out of Seattle, make sure you're checking the price and availability out of Tri-Cities, especially as we come into the fall and see the availability come back online.
Yeah, and in a market so Seattle will keep most of its nonstop destinations, but Alaska and Delta are going to have much less frequent flights out of Seattle. So especially in thinner routes. So before this crisis, there were 3 flights a day on Alaska to Minneapolis. There will probably be one, and it will probably be a 76-seat plane instead of a 737 on the other side. And so it's not going to be as convenient to drive over because the schedules aren't going to be as good. It's going to be much more convenient to fly out of the Tri-Cities. And if you're one of those who drives to Portland, you're probably going to have to make the same connection you made if you flew out of the Tri-Cities. So a lot of the disadvantages we have kind of disappear because of this. So I always say, never let the crisis go to waste, right? I think this is a real opportunity for us to make some changes in how we travel and how we're able to serve our market.
Yeah, well, again, we'll give a shout out, and I think when we get done here, we'll talk to Buck about what we can do to try to aggregate some of that demand, because if there is that opportunity, and I think that's the great thing about, what Buck set up, Jack, with your help, is that direct line of feedback and communication to the airline. So, we can collect some data, feed it back to them, and then they give us a shot. That's a huge opportunity again.
Absolutely.
So, jump into some of these questions, and we got a couple for Buck here. So I think you might have hit on this before, but how many flights do we currently have at Tri-Cities Airport, and are there any flights to Vegas?
We currently have, it just, it's hard to say per day because they're not all flying 7 days a week right now, but we have between, 7 and 8 a day right now. That's going to creep up a little bit in June. And Allegiant has sporadically started the Vegas service back up. I see they have a lot of cancellations for June, but it's kind of a periodic it's just hard for me to pin down when it is, because it's very random right now. It's not very consistent, but Vegas is coming back.
Sounds good. And then I think you started to talk about this, Buck, but can you go over again just the procedure? And I think you talked about different procedures for different airlines, but how are they cleaning the planes in between flights? And then I think you started to talk about electrostatic cleaning or something. Can you talk a little bit more about that, just to give folks a little more confidence in these procedures they're using?
And again, they're all a little different, but they all are disinfecting the window latches, the seats, the seat backs, the seat belts, the restrooms. Some are using the electrostatic cleaning, which cleans, I believe it's all surfaces. I don't know if it cleans the air, but there is on board, I think there's been studies that show that on board it's recycled through the HEPA filters and the air in there is clean. But I don't know how clean, I'm not a
you're not
scientist.
that, right.
I can talk about that. So one of my clients, go figure, is Mayo Clinic. They own and operate the airport in Rochester, Minnesota. And so I am on a lot. Actually, I have a call with them in about an hour and 15 minutes. The HEPA filters on the airplane are actually, by law, 75% more efficient than the ones that Mayo Clinic uses in its operating rooms. So the air on the airplane, and there is a Mayo Clinic, well, it's on Facebook on Mayo Clinic if you want to look up this article. The air on the airplane is actually cleaner and has fewer virus particles and bacterial particles than the air in Mayo Clinic's own operating rooms. So that gives you an idea. United is electrostatically cleaning, which means it's essentially a fog that kills anything on any surface. And with the filters, you can be pretty sure that as you walk on that plane, it is 100% clean. And with the masks, the chance of transmission, even in a small confined space like that, is very small. Mayo Clinic tells me, that's not my words, it's from Mayo Clinic. And so Mayo is actually having its patients, who are all over the world, start to fly back into Rochester for treatment, because Mayo no longer has concerns about those patients contracting COVID-19 when they're on the plane. So I think, that gives me confidence to get back on a plane.
Oh, that's great. See, Jack, we'll keep you on. We had a question about, and I think you talked about it a little bit, so the question might have come up before you went over it, but it's talking about getting to Minneapolis. And I think the connection is, we've got, obviously, with some of our contractors and subcontractors, they have business in Washington, D.C. And, that was even in that new United flight through Chicago. It's one thing we were excited about that before it got changed, was that it would be a red eye and you could, leave Tri-Cities at night and then get there for a morning meeting in DC. So can you go over the mechanics of like that Minneapolis flight that maybe Delta would want to connect through Salt Lake instead? And maybe it kind of relates to what you already talked about, the opportunity that we have with SkyWest, kind of how their business models, different than other carriers, maybe because of the planes they fly and how they operate.
Yeah, so we do understand Minneapolis was the best and most efficient connection to Washington National DCA. The timing on the flight was perfect, and there were multiple flights a day from Minneapolis to DC. And we're hopeful we'll get that back. In the meantime, there is a flight from Salt Lake on Delta to Washington, D.C. It's only one a day, but our Salt Lake flight that exists today connect to that flight. So that is one way to go. There are multiple flights from Denver on United to Washington, D.C., and our flights they connect now twice a day or they will by July, twice a day to Washington, D.C. Alaska has flights out of Seattle. And we do still connect to that flight. It's only one a day right now, but we do connect to that. And those are all to Washington National. There are other connections we have to Dulles and Baltimore. But there are connections every single day that can get you to DCA today. Now, we know we don't have that overnight. Red-eye flying is pretty much gone across the country. I mean, even big cities don't. There's not a red eye between LA and DC right now.
Wow.
There's no overnight flight in that market. So it's going to be a while before that kind of flying comes back. But we are watching in particular that Washington connection as each schedule. We get a schedule update pretty much every Sunday morning because the airlines file those schedules overnight on Saturday to do the least disruption to the reservation system. Every single Sunday morning, we're checking on that connection to make sure that if our flight gets shifted and the connection's only 30 minutes, we need to make sure that that gets shifted. SkyWest, the challenge with them is that the aircraft they fly don't really, the ones that they can fly under their own risk don't have the range for Minneapolis service. And so they're not really an option for us to go and replace that service. But you can rest assured we will be talking with Delta and probably be traveling to Delta to talk to them in Atlanta as soon as it's appropriate, as soon as they're back in the office and we can travel because we understand how important that connection is.
You bet, that's great. We got a question about, does it make sense to encourage the airlines to offer buy now, use them anytime fares? You know, are any airlines looking at that kind of model just to maybe generate some cash now, realizing that, you know, maybe if they held off on that capacity, it changed their model? But are you seeing any of that, Jack?
Well, we did see all of the
that?
carriers have now extended the travel waiver to the end of June. And essentially what that means, if you book any ticket for travel in the future, by the end of June, you can change the dates with no change fee all the way until June of 2021. So you can use that money for a future ticket. Now, keep in mind, if the fare goes up before you rebook the ticket, you have to pay the fare difference, but you won't lose any money. You will be able to use that money for a future fare without having to pay a change fee as long as you book before the end of June. So I'll tell you what I did is my wife and I like to go to Christmas markets in Europe, and we haven't been in a few years, and there are amazing business class fares in December to Europe right now. So we bought a business class fare that was less than what a normal coach fare would be. And we figure if we can't actually go in December, well, we don't lose anything because we can just use that money to buy another fare sometime, you know, in the future. So that is an advantage that's happening right now. But it's not the same as you can buy it and use it for whatever. The other thing that airlines are doing, if you're inclined to do this, is they're selling frequent flyer miles super, super cheap. American had a deal where you could buy the frequent flyer miles for half a penny. Normally it's about two cents a mile. It was half a penny a mile. So you could stock up on enough frequent flyer miles to go around the world if you wanted to for probably about $2,500. So there are some great deals if you are inclined to go ahead and lock in the deals or lock in those miles today. Keep in mind on somebody like American, now that they're joining Alaska in the same alliance, you could use those out of the Tri-Cities.
Oh, that's great. We got one here for Buck that came in from Facebook, but Buck, can you talk about TSA? And, you know, so if those of us that haven't traveled during the shutdown, you know, we get ready to start doing some travel again, will there be changes in TSA or any changes that you've implemented on the airport operational side as far as screening or, you know, 6-foot social distancing? Any changes like that either between your staff or TSA that we'll see?
Well, from TSA, I don't, you know, there's no requirement for passengers to wear masks at the checkpoint. Their employees will be wearing them. They're trying to go as touch free as possible with you scanning your own boarding pass. They still need to touch your ID, but they're working on everything they can to go as touchless as possible. They're allowing some larger liquids through at this time. If you're wearing a mask, they may ask you to drop your mask just so they can verify that your face matches your ID. The airport is putting down, we've got tape now with the social distancing. We've ordered some nice markers and they should be in, I think them and the sneeze guards that we've ordered for ticket counters and stuff should start coming in next week. Maybe we might even see some of these things start filtering in this weekend. So that's where we're at on that as of now.
Oh, that sounds great. Here's kind of a speculative question about here in the Tri-Cities, we're seeing our hospitalizations rise. We're actually seeing an increase in local cases. And the question is, do you expect this will have an effect on how many flights we're booking out of there? And I mean, this is a correlation question for our data guy, Jack. Like, I mean, I love those charts about GDP and flights out of the Tri-Cities, great correlation, but do you have a look in your data searches, have you seen any correlation in between, outbreaks or confirmed cases as it affects air travel? Is there any correlation there?
There absolutely is. We've seen it in areas that have had higher numbers of cases or had the cases sooner, like Washington State, New York in particular, or places where lockdowns are lasting for a very long time. For example, Los Angeles could be locked all the way until Labor Day. We are seeing fewer bookings, and we are seeing a correlation between a rise in cases and bookings going down, and cases going down and bookings going up. Especially upper Midwest cities where there have been very, very few cases, we've seen huge bookings, especially to Florida. I represent St. Pete, Florida Airport, which is a base for Allegiant, and Allegiant on Monday had more passengers than they had on Memorial Day of last year. They actually have more passengers, over 10,000 passengers. Because places in the Midwest that haven't really seen any cases, those people are already up and traveling right now. But in the West, our travel has been slower to come back, and I think it will. And we saw our bookings took a bigger hit than national bookings in March and again in April. We don't have all of our May numbers yet, but we know that's because there's more cases. So I do think getting those numbers going in the right direction is a key. And I also think a key is, for example, here I live in Multnomah County, Oregon. We are still not even in phase one. We're totally locked down, and we're not even allowed to leave our county because all of the counties in Oregon, aside from us, are open and have restaurants open and everything else. But people from Multnomah County are not allowed to go to those places. So here, the demand, and Multnomah is the biggest county in Oregon, is not going to come back until we're past that phase one point. And I think it's very similar in Washington at phase two. Until we are in phase two, our bookings are going to be down.
That's great. Well, we got about 5 more minutes here. We got a couple questions. The next one talks about the CARES Act money that we talked about, that went to assist airports specifically. And, Jack, as you talked about, some of these smaller airports may close, kind of more of the at-risk airports. Is there any speculation or talk that, if an airport got some CARES Act money and then they closed, would there be maybe a reapportionment of those funds? Just, any guess or speculation about that? Or have you heard anything?
Right. So I don't think the actual airports will close.
Okay.
In fact, they're not allowed to close because any airport that takes federal funding, if you can close your airport, but you have to pay back your last 30 years of grants. So no airport can afford to close. That's one of the grant assurances that you give the FAA when you take their money, is that you're going to remain open. So I think it's possible airports will lose air service completely, and they will be just general aviation and business airports, but I don't think the airports will close completely. The CARES Act money is simply it's a grant. It's a block grant. It's a total amount of money apportioned on some formula that none of us seem to understand to each airport. We know it has to do with your number of passengers and the amount of debt and the amount of cash you have on hand. Some of it seemed odd, but hey, it is what it is. Every airport got their money. That money is not going back into the system. If we get into October and all of a sudden 50 airports lose all air service, those airports are going to have budgets that are completely shot. They're not going to be able to stay open without another grant. So I think more likely is that as we see the extent of the damage and we get into the fall, there will be another act that sends funding to airports. And if there is one, all airports are going to get some funding, and Tri-Cities would get more funding too. I think that's more likely than a reapportionment.
Okay, that's great. I think that maybe this one for both of you guys, but are any of the airlines talking about or possibly using plexiglass dividers? Buck, you talked about the sneeze guards for counters, but any thoughts about those between seats on the planes? Is that even part of the conversation or an option out there?
It has been a conversation that I've been privy to. The challenge is going to be getting the FAA to approve it, because what's going to happen is going to make getting off a plane in an emergency more difficult. And anything where that is the case, it's not going to get approved. Also, the air is constantly being filtered out of the plane. And by the way, contrary to popular belief, the air is not recycled on the plane. The air comes into the plane, then goes out of the plane, and new air is coming in every moment. There are vents all over the front of the plane and in the engines that are bringing in new air. So the air is not recycled. It's coming in and going out. But having said that, having these plexiglass dividers, you almost make it more dangerous because stuff can stick to it. So you're getting another high touch surface in a place where people are staying the whole time, where you're cleaning the air out, but you're not cleaning that during the flight. So I think that is highly unlikely. I do think masks are going to be required for some time until we really feel like we've gotten past any real chance of COVID spreading on a plane. I think you're going to have to wear a mask. So that's something that I, have just accepted. I just have to get used to that.
Yeah, no, that's a great response. And I think your reference to the Mayo Clinic, that folks can, if they have a question about it, that they've got a good article on their Facebook side. I think that's a good reference. Anybody that's worried about that safety aspect, that's a great answer. Well, we're down to 2 minutes. And so maybe you guys could have just a closing word, and I'll just throw it out there because we did travel together, and I learned that both Buck and Jack are native Illinoisans, which I don't know if that's the official term or not, but if you want to tell any story related to, being native Illinoisans in your closing statements.
Well, I went to the good school in Illinois, the University of Illinois, 20th ranked university in the world, according to the Financial Times of London. Buck chose to attend a different school, right, Buck?
Yes, I went to Southern Illinois, which is it's one of the top 20 universities for having fun. So Jack and I went different routes in college, but hey, I got a degree, right? So.
Yeah, now he's my boss. How does that work?
But seriously, I want to tell everyone, the Port of Pasco and Tri-Cities Airport, we really appreciate everybody flying out of our airport. And we're going to be sending out a survey to everyone that we can, and hopefully everyone will respond to that survey. But it's more about asking, what do you expect? What can we do to ensure your confidence? And we're going to try and gather all this data and make sure we're doing everything that our community wants to feel confident to fly out of our airport again. So, we really appreciate the business. We're doing everything we can to make everyone feel safe, and we just hope when the time comes, they do choose to fly out of the Tri-Cities Airport. So
that's great, Buck. Well, thanks for joining us today. Jack, you got anything as we close it out?
I love your headphones.
Thanks. I did have a question about the airplane pictures on my wall, and I was just gearing up for this, aviation theme today. I'm, trying to pretend like we're on the flight where we got my noise canceling on. So thank you. Well, Buck and Jack, thank you. You guys are great, and we really appreciate the partnership that we have, and look forward to the future where we can go and, recruit some more airlines. And then we will follow up with you on this opportunity to start to forecast, especially some of our business demand as we go back. And if that opens up some more opportunities with some airlines, I think that's great for the Tri-Cities. So thank you both for your time. You guys have a good weekend, and thanks for joining us on Coffee with Karl.
Thanks, Karl.